don't like to be on camera. Okay, so I just opened up the room, so we'll be getting attendees joining here in a minute, guys. And I'm going to do a little sharing. Hey, Lynn Kleinmeyer, I'm going to, as an iTech board member, can I share this out on the iTech page?
Sure. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, good. Ooh, there's some flattering photos that share on the page. Okay.
All of the exciting behind the scenes work of getting a webinar going as we all stare at Stacy. Narrate what you're doing, Stacy.
I'm just sharing it on our Facebook page so other people can see it.
The excitement's building.
Synchronous. All right.
Wait, did Jake just leave?
Did he get enough B-roll?
He's not staying for the whole thing?
Excitement.
Jake.
You know what? Usually he watches from his office or he comes in. So we're going to post that there. Okay. So we've got about 20 and rising participants joining us right now, attendees. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and welcome everybody today to our online learning, supporting online learning webinar series. The AEAs have collaborated together as a statewide system to provide a series of webinars to help support our educators in, teaching in kind of an online environment. But as we're hearing throughout the webinars, one of the themes that has come through is these instructional, like these strategies and these shifts might be a little bit different way of doing some just good educational practices that might engage different learners. So they're going to be good when you're in an online learning environment, but you can also use them when you are face-to-face in the classroom too. And there's been some just nice connections, I think. So I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Stacy Beamer. I'm the coordinator of digital learning here at Grant Wood AEA out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa City. We serve the corridor area. And as many of you know or may have heard by now, we had a little storm last week. So with that little storm, we had to postpone some of our webinars as part of the series. So thank you for those of you who are joining us today. And Corey Rogers, one of the digital learning consultants on our team, was going to join us last week, but is supporting a district today. So Lynn Kleinmeyer and Gina Rogers are with us sharing today. So we're streaming this in a couple places. Right now, some folks are joining us via Zoom. And if you're joining us via Zoom and you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or in the Q&A field that you have below. And Lynn, Gina, or I will answer those as we go. Or if you are viewing this on Facebook, too, feel free to throw something in the comment section and I will be monitoring that. And again, asking Lynn and Gina to respond and we can hopefully provide answers. Also, if you've got some good ideas, because, we had some time this spring to warm up using some of these tools. So if you've got some good strategies or ideas to engage kids or even your colleagues using these synchronous tools, go ahead and throw those in the chat or comments as well. We are always learning from each other as we go through this together. This webinar is being recorded and the webinar and the resource links will be shared on that landing document where you signed up. So just be aware that if you aren't able to watch this live, it will be on the AEA's Facebook page, but also the YouTube channel will have a recording for all of the upcoming webinars and the previous webinars too. So without further ado, Gina and Lynn, let's talk synchronous online learning strategies.
That sounds amazing. Well, thank you so much, as Stacy said, for joining us today. We, in our short time together, are going to kind of ground our conversation on those synchronous learning platforms around these three concepts. This idea of building the foundations that you need for success. Then transitioning to delivering content, and then finally, like really honing in on that engagement piece and checking for understanding. And so it's our intent as we go through this, that as we discuss these concepts, we're going to be sharing a plethora of ideas and resources. And as Stacy said, we would love to hear from you throughout this entire webinar, but also we would love to hear not only your ideas, but questions that you have. So feel free to drop those in the chat, like she said. One thing we do want to iterate right from the beginning, though, is that this webinar, our focus is on the strategies when it comes to Zoom and Google Meet. We're going to make the assumption that you are already somewhat familiar with the platforms themselves. However, if that is not the case, we did want to provide some resources for you to build your capacity and understanding of the platforms, the features therein, just so that you can make that educated choice, either in choosing for yourself or familiarizing yourself with the platform that your district has chosen to utilize. So just wanted to highlight those resources there for you. But like I said, our focus today is not going to be navigating the platforms, but more thinking about what we can do with those platforms.
So we're going to start today talking about building foundations for learning and community. And so each one of the big 3 chunks of learning that we're going to be engaging in today, we're going to cover 3 main focus points. So first, we're going to think a little bit about questions to consider for that particular focus point. Foundational strategies that will help you get started or lay the foundation for success within that focus point, and then some different community strategies that could be utilized as well in relation to that focus point. And so as we're getting started with building foundation for learning,
thinking about the questions to consider. That was a nice transition, Gina. 5 on that one.
My sentence.
So when you're thinking about building that foundation for your students and really establishing that component for success, some things to consider as you get started is when you're having that synchronous connection with your students, how many participants are you having engaging at a time? And the reason we bring this question up is it helps you to think strategically about which features of platforms you might be using to help kids make that connection not only with you, but also with each other. So thinking about, if you have a small group of students, the types of choices that you might make versus if you have a large number of students, 30 or so, it will help you to be intentional about how you are allowing them to interact not only with you, but with each other. Also keeping in mind what's age appropriate. So working your way through some of these different ideas within this beginning key concept, thinking about your current context, the cognitive load that those particular students can handle, and thinking about where are some entry points and starting points for those students. And then last but not least, within this idea of building community and establishing this foundation for learning, is thinking strategically about what other support personnel you have access to that can help you with this piece, because it is so vital. With that, thinking about, are there associates or paraprofessionals who could join in your Zoom calls or your Google Meet connections to help scaffold and support students? Are there some of your specials teachers who could join in the conversation? I'll give a shout out to teacher librarians. They're a great resource. But then also thinking about, are there other colleagues, special education teachers, for example, that could help? Because this component of building foundations for learning and community is so essential to establishing that foundation for success. So being very, very strategic from the get-go is super important. So when you think about establishing that beginning foundation, the very, very first piece is preparing yourself and your students for success. So when you think about preparing for success, you think about what are those things that you need to communicate and establish so that there's a positive experience for yourself, for your students, for their parents. And so things to consider would be, how are you going to scaffold and support platform navigation? After you've communicated which platform you're going to be utilizing, whether it be Zoom or whether it be Google Meet, and establishing how often you are connecting, what are those other pieces that you maybe want to highlight to remove some barriers, just even in accessing? And when you think about the platform navigation, thinking about how are you going to introduce that before they connect, but also when they connect. So making that assumption that maybe they haven't had the experience with the platform that you maybe previously have or your students previously had, making sure that they understand your expectations, the features that you're going to be using, just removing some of those barriers. But then also outside of the platform, being intentional about the organization of your materials. Are you also using an asynchronous platform where they are going to be asked to engage with content, gather materials? So for example, are you using Google Classroom, or your students are accessing things with Seesaw? Do they have those readily available for them? And then also gathering physical materials, making sure that they are setting the stage from the very beginning and have everything that they need right at their fingertips, whether it's a virtual piece or it's the actual tangible physical materials. So helping them make sure that they have things like headphones if they're necessary. If you're going to be asking them to engage in activities that require them to write, do they have writing materials? Those kinds of pieces, being very explicit from the very, very beginning is going to help everyone feel confident.
So to build off of just setting that stage for success in these virtual meetings, one thing that we want to think a little bit about is building community, and specifically in relation to that, the idea of establishing norms. And so how are we engaging with one another within our virtual spaces, and how are we being respectful of others within our virtual spaces as well. And so in being a little bit more culturally responsive, one way to approach the establishment of norms is to co-create those norms. And so linked on the slide deck and coming into the chat now is an article that talks a little bit about the co-creation of norms with students. And so this teacher just kind of lays the kind of the outline or the groundwork for how that might look and how it might look a little bit different in the virtual classroom. And one other thing that he discusses in this particular article is the idea of the camera. And so I know as a facilitator or as a teacher, we really want to see the faces of our students, but we also have to be mindful that we are coming into students' personal private spaces in their homes, and maybe they don't want to share that. And so thinking a little bit about whether or not that's something that you want to require of students for them to turn on their camera and have their homes be seen, or is there other options that you could be looking at? Let's see. Also, one
of the things, Gina, I'm going to interrupt, sorry, but it's just as we start thinking about if we want to see their faces, because that's a lot of, interacting with folks, or just getting to know them, but seeing their faces. So that's why that background feature can be really important and used in Zoom. Do you guys talk about that? Adding the background, and it's coming to Google Meet too. So having a background will let you see their face, but not share the background of their homes with you if not needed. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, or even talking a little bit with them about, okay, so how do you position your camera? Can you position it against a blank wall, or set up your workspace again, it's a blank wall. So one way to create those norms or establish ideas about what we might want our virtual classrooms to look like might be to use a Google Jamboard. And so that's a real quick little whiteboard space where people can come together and add ideas on sticky notes into the same place. Collaborative, really easy to use from afar with students. Additionally, we have some other, oops, sorry.
Sorry, Gina, I was going back to the Jamboard for you.
let's see. So there's also a few different examples here of what sample norms might look like for some different classrooms. And so virtual classrooms, I guess I should say. And so thinking a little bit about coming in on time or muting your mic if you're not speaking so we don't get so much background noise from everyone's house. Possibly using hand gestures, which we'll talk about a little bit more to demonstrate your engagement within the classroom. And I did notice that someone had a raised hand a little bit ago, and so I don't know if there's a question out there, but you can definitely pop that question into the chat or into the Q&A, and we will address that as we move forward. But if you're looking for examples of what norms might be, here's a couple links that or a couple resources that we chose to share with you, and they are linked on, or they're dropped into that chat.
So another strategy that once again is going to set everyone up for success is establishing roles. It's great when everybody knows expectations and what to expect. And so another strategy, that assigning roles and defining what you want your students to actually be doing when they are engaging in your asynchronous learning. So we once again have some examples of what this might look like. Not only is this important to establish from the beginning as a way to kind of keep students involved in their learning process, but later on down the road, when you're actually asking them to collaborate with each other, it sets the stage for that as well. So things like establishing who is going to be the recorder, if there's ideas that you're asking kids to capture during your synchronous learning, how you're going to have somebody sharing out and speaking when you ask questions, or if you have some group work that we're going to talk about later on, who's going to be reporting on that. So just once again, another idea of how to maximize the foundation.
And so we also discussed a little bit, or I alluded to the idea of classroom hand signals. And so this can be a great way for students to engage in what's happening within the virtual classroom without having to unmute themselves and voice what they're saying. And so I know many of our teachers are versed in our area education agency, versed in math talks, and there are lots of hand signals that go along with math talks. So for example, like me too, or I'm also thinking that way. And then wait, yes, no. And so there's a variety of different hand signals that you can use just to continue to engage students and ensure that they are taking away what it is that you want them to take away as you're presenting.
So another piece when we talk about building community in a virtual learning space, it's important for students to feel seen and heard. And sometimes that's literally. So some things that you can do real quick, once again, going back to that question of being mindful of how many students you have participating, is doing, for example, mic checks, where you have students respond and, you know, kind of one by one unmute themselves, or you do the unmuting as the teacher and ask them just to respond verbally. You can also do video checks, just a visual confirmation. These don't always have to be the actual video. It can also be utilizing, we're going to talk about some of the other features of the platforms, things like your reactions in Zoom. So it's nice because it's twofold. You're building community, but you're also making sure that the students, their equipment is working the way it's supposed to, so that you can hear, they can hear, and that you are both being able to see each other. So it's a double whammy.
I'm going to interrupt for a moment. Lori just asked about going back and looking at those links that I'm posting in the chat. So Gina answered the question too, but I wanted to just do it live. All of the links that these guys are sharing are on the slide deck, which will be, it is actually right now on the landing page, and I will post the slide deck link again at the very end so you have all of it. Yeah, we know we're throwing a lot, but we just didn't know if people wanted to peruse as we're talking about some of these. So you'll get it multiple ways.
Okay, and then finally, to round out the idea of building community and setting the foundations for learning, um, ways to engage and get our students into that virtual classroom might be engaging in some games or community building activities. These are similar to the things that you would be doing on your first probably days of school, as you were meeting your students to just begin to establish that relationship with them. And so our colleague Corey has put together this awesome doc that has all sorts of different ideas, different games or icebreaker community building activities that can be facilitated within Zoom or Google Hangouts and different virtual environments. She's got all sorts of different links on this document as well. And so this is a treasure trove, if I've ever seen one, of a resource. And so I would definitely suggest checking that one out. Additionally, our colleague that's my husband, not my colleague, Jonathan Wiley. There's a lot of Jonathans in my life. Okay, Jonathan Wiley wrote a short paper here about other ideas for hosting engaging Zoom and Google, or hosting engaging Zoom and Google Meet calls. He's got a lot of great ideas on there as well about how we can ensure that we get our learners there into that virtual environment and capture their attention.
Right. And once again, this is kind of a double whammy piece of, by engaging in games and these community building ideas, you're allowing students to build relationships with each other, which we know is absolutely essential, but you're also giving them an opportunity to navigate not only the platforms, but also other virtual learning, online learning resources in a low stakes environment. So it is definitely worth taking the time.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit to delivering content and thinking a little bit about how do you teach or how do you instruct using Zoom or using Google Hangouts, and what are some tricks and tips that you can think about as you are presenting content, and what sort of content works with different presentation methodologies on these different tools. So we'll start first with questions to consider before we even begin delivering that online question or that online content, and then we'll move on from there. And so our first questions to consider as we are getting ready to provide some instruction in our or in a virtual environment is just, what is the purpose of that connection? And so this goes back to really heightening the salience of that learning goal for students or that learning objective. And so you really want to make sure that you are communicating very clearly and succinctly. During this connection time, we're going to be learning this. Previously, you have learned this and you're ready now for this piece. Okay. Also, you need to take into consideration what students already know prior to the connection or prior to the meeting that you are going to set up with them. And so the best way that you can probably gather that is through some sort of formative assessment that might be delivered through your asynchronous platform, or maybe some sort of quick formative check that you engaged in the last time that you met synchronously in that virtual environment. So somehow you got some sort of information that told you your kids are here and they're ready for this particular next piece of learning.
Gina, I'm going to shameless plug because it's a nice transition on how these pieces of the webinars fit together. Andrew Fenstermaker from Iowa City Community Schools and Best Wants are going to be from our shop are going to be doing a session all about feedback and assessment tools. So later this week. So if you're looking for those, it gets covered deeper later.
So the first instructional strategy or way to instruct on Zoom that you might consider, and we'll focus here on Zoom for just a second, is the just standard screen share. And so that is an environment that you are probably very accustomed to or used to. And in fact, you're sitting in that environment right now. And so this is when your teacher brings up some sort of a slide deck or some sort of an online tool that he or she wants to share with their students or with their audience, and then they will share it that way. And so there's a quick GIF here that just shows how we go into that screen share. Use the screen share button, real quick and easy. No problems at all with that. You can also allow other people to share their screens as well. And so if you want a student to maybe share what he or she has created, so for example, maybe they have a research project or something that you would like them to share, you can always go into the participants and add them as a co-host or allow them to share there. Moving on in Google Meet, similar situation where you have that screen share option that is available, so you can show what you're doing. It's very easy, just in those three dots down at the bottom, and kind of a little GIF here that shows where you go to with that. A couple different things that you can share in that Google Meet browser or in that Google Meet tool that are similar to Zoom. So you can share a tab within your Chrome browser. You can share a different application. So if you were pulling up some sort of an additional online or additional application on your computer you wanted to show the kids, you could show that, or you can pull up your window as well. So sometimes a screen share isn't going to cut it for what you're trying to do with your students. And so an example I can think of with this is math. And so in math, there's a lot of, you want to be able to show how you're going to work out that problem exactly. Zoom is really nice in that it has a whiteboard function that is built into it. And so when you select your screen share options, one of those options is whiteboard, and you can then use your mouse, or if you have what do you call it, a Wacom tablet or graphics tablet, that's easy to use to do your drawing or to do your calculations. What's also nice in the Zoom whiteboard is that there are some stickers. And so if you want to do some quick manipulatives real quick to show different strategies or things that you might do in math, those are available for you as well. So with Google Meet, as of right now, they don't have that whiteboard that's built in, but there's a couple different hacks or workarounds that you could use. So share your screen and set up a Google Drawing, and you could use Google Drawing as one way that you could show some different concepts. So here's an example that we were just doing a quick little bar chart type of a thing. And so as we were filling in together as a group, we just moved over some of these different tactiles to show what we had. Another option for that, beyond the drawing hack, would be to use a Jamboard. And so I referenced that in our very first slides, or in one of the very first slides. So Jamboard is a nice collaborative online whiteboard where folks can post sticky notes and share ideas, but there's also a pen feature that can be used to real quickly write or jot down notes. And so just like a quick little I guess, whiteboard that you would have right there for your students to take a look at as you're working through something. And then another hack would be the slide scribble tool. And so in Google Slides, there is a quick little scribble tool that is available, or that's in the pen features. And so it's called Scribble. Pick that up, and then you can write freehand on your slides. And then last is, I use this quite a bit, Awe app. It's just a really nice, quick, powerful little online whiteboard. It is collaborative too, and so you can ask someone else to join in with you, and you both can write simultaneously on the same whiteboard. But it's quick, easy, and it does the job. So there's some options there. You just have to employ just an external type of tool in order to get the whiteboard options going in Google Meet right now. So there's also some options in Zoom. So going back to Zoom to share external devices. And so say, for example, your students are joining you on iPads and you want to show them exactly how to do something on their iPad. And so if you have an iPad also at home, you can go in and select join or share iPad screen. In Zoom, it's really nice the way that it's set up, that as long as they're on the same Wi-Fi network, it just connects them. And so here I'm showing, I believe, maybe Explain Everything as the app that I was kind of going through with to model that. And so the instructions for how to connect your iPad or share that external device, iPad, in Zoom are linked on the slide deck. And then I believe Stacy dropped them into the chat here too. And then also, if you move into your advanced share features and your screen share, there is an option to share content from a second camera. And so if you have a document camera or something like that you would like to share, or a web camera that you would like to share something with your students with, you can select that. I know that the IPEVO cameras work well with this, or the newer IPEVO cameras work well with this. This might be an option. So I can think if you were, or I can think about a time like if you were doing something with base 10 blocks and you wanted to be able to show with your students, okay, so exactly how to move around the manipulatives. You might have your document camera up above your hands as you're kind of showing how to work through with those manipulatives. Or maybe there's some sort of a sheet or a paper, or if you're doing a drawing demonstration that you want to show for your students, this would be a nice option. You can also share an external device on Hangouts. And so document cameras are the ones that I researched the most that you are able to share. The IPEVO camera works well. There's a video here, we're not going to show it right now, that just kind of lays out what that looks like. So you can just select an additional camera when you're in your Google Meet, and then that IPEVO camera will come up or switch to that different camera. You can also use the IPEVO software and show that as an outside window on your Meet as well. One thing that comes up time and time again that we have teachers ask us about is just, I'd like to share this quick little YouTube video with my students on a Zoom call or on a Google or a Meet, and it's just, they can't hear it, what's going on. And so when you go into your screen share options, down at the bottom in Zoom, there are two little check boxes. You just want to make sure that you do select those to share the computer sound, and then to optimize the screen for the video clip. That way your students will be able to hear exactly what you are sharing with them in video. And then same in Google Hangouts, choosing a Chrome tab. So that's going to be where you have your video queued up, and then make sure that that share audio box is checked. So this is a feature that came in Zoom. I think it was towards the end of spring or early summer that they've added this, which allows you to show your Zoom controls in your window. And so what I mean by that is that it will show those who are participating, you clicking on the screen share button and you choosing whatever option, and then you presenting. And so this is really nice if you are helping others learn Zoom. So like, for example, if eventually you want your kids to be able to screen share something, turning this option on in the Zoom settings will really pay dividends, because you can narrate, okay, this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to have one of you try next. Now this setting, just one, it's not tricky, but one place or one thing to know where you have to find this is that you have to log into your Zoom account online and go into your full settings when you're logged in online. And it's going to be in your meeting basics. And I think it's about like a third or 2/3 of the way down those settings, and turn that one on. There's tons and tons of settings for Zoom when you log into your account online that you can turn on, turn off. I still need to turn off my meeting password setting because it trips people up every time I forget that it's on. But there's all sorts of settings to look for in there. And that show your Zoom controls window is one of those. So that was a lot of information on just some different ways to, or different strategies to use when delivering content online, different, I guess, tips or tricks that are in the tools that you can think of or that can be used to deliver that content. And so if you'd like to share in the chat, just what are some ways that you delivered content last spring? And what are some ideas that you're excited to try as school starts? Or if you have some questions or things that you're wondering about, pop those into the chat or the Q&A and we can address those.
So we'll pause for just a second. Stacy, you can tell us too if our Facebook friends have anything that they're contributing or asking.
We have a quiet group today.
Just soaking it all in. Just
right?
Soaking all these ideas in. And, you know, one of the benefits of, you know, we were very aware when we put together this webinar that this was going to be a lot of information to digest, and recognizing that we have an hour together to basically throw all these things at you. So once again, to reiterate, you are going to have access to not only the recording, but also this slide deck with all of the resources and the links that we've highlighted. They're shared in the chat with you. So it would be really, really nice to be able to go back and revisit multiple times. We just had Sandra share that, can I get another computer hooked to my work computer so I can see my PowerPoint notes on the second computer as I teach with a PowerPoint?
So just to answer that, you don't necessarily need 2 monitors, because we've had staff ask that too. So what you can do is, as you do a screen share, so if you're using a Google slide deck, you know, and you have your speaker notes in the little pop-up, and then the big pop-up is your presentation, kind of like what Lynn's got right now. She only shared that one tab where her presentation is, and so she still has her speaker notes. So that's what I'm like mentioning to people. And having 2 computers, I've done it before, but it is almost more cumbersome to jump back and forth, because you might be on one looking and you've advanced it, but you haven't advanced the other one. So just, can you do that in Zoom? Yes, you can. So when I'm sharing my screen, I just share the tab or the window, and then I will have Zoom on, resize it, make it a little bit smaller, and then I'll have my speaker notes right next to it. And I can, if that makes sense.
That's a great strategy.
Thanks. I'm not as dumb as I look some days.
No, you're always full of great ideas, Stacy Beamer. You know, it is nice, Sandra, you're right, that to be able to have that access, but having the 2 windows, it's great to be able to just be able to reference back and forth. It takes a little bit of getting used to, and so you'll figure out the workflow that works best for you. All right, before we move on, any other comments or questions?
There was a question, just are certain districts required to use Google Meet or Zoom? So yes, just I would definitely check with your district tech director or admin to see what the preferred platform is for your district. Some districts have chosen one versus the other, and so that's a district decision, and one that you want to touch base with those district personnel to find out.
All right. Hearing nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and segue to the final component that we're talking about today, the concept of engagement and checking for understanding. So, you start off setting everyone up for success, taking some opportunity to build relationships amongst students and with you. And then you transition to that delivering your content, making sure that the students have the information that you need them to have. And then the final piece is really thinking strategically about how you can leverage your synchronous learning platforms for engagement and to check for understanding. Now, before we get started on this, just a couple things, just so that we're all on the same page with what we're talking about. When I'm discussing engagement, it's not the same as that compliance, that check-in piece. It's more about how can we have students be active participants in their learning process. So when we're talking about engagement, it's talking about activating and creating those opportunities for students to take that ownership. And so being very aware of what that will take for students, understanding them as learners is absolutely important. And understanding that students are social, that relationship piece is absolutely important. And so we also know that learning is a social endeavor. So being very aware of how you can use that community building that you've already done to now allow students to be active participants in their own learning process is absolutely essential. We also know that feedback is an absolutely essential part of the loop, the learning loop for our students. However, one thing I want to point out with a caveat here, right now, for the purposes of our conversation today, when I talk about getting feedback, I am talking about for you as a teacher to gather information, to be able to pivot and make some instructional choices. I assume that there are going to be some extra pieces that are covered later on this week with the webinar coming up with Beth and Andrew, where they're going to be talking a little bit more about outside ideas, once again, to really establish concretely what your students are understanding. But these are just some ideas for you to get that quick check kind of information. So once again, questions to consider. Depending upon which platform you're using, what are the resources that are already available? Like Gina just mentioned, many districts have made the choice as a district to either use Meet or Zoom. And so with those two platforms, there are some similar features, but also there are going to be some differences. And so being very aware of what those resources that are already built in, what they are, and then how you can leverage them to really take advantage of that social aspect and allow students to be those active participants. So with all of that, also thinking strategically, reviewing some of the questions that have already come up, how many participants do you have, and what is age appropriate? As we go through the remainder of our conversation, just being aware that there are some of the resources that we're going to talk about that maybe are more developmentally appropriate for a certain age group. And so we want to make sure that we're being very aware of that. I will also share with you that during this section, I am going to lean a little bit more heavily towards Zoom and talk about some of the features, but please know that Meet is going to be releasing some features that are going to be comparable to Zoom very, very shortly. In fact, there's going to be a rollout in September and October. So I'm going to highlight some of those things and give you some other options in the meantime. So with that, we're talking about the engagement piece first. So really allowing students to leverage that social aspect of learning kind of comes with two parts: promoting discussion and asking questions. So we want them to be able to have that exchange of ideas. That's part of that social learning, of that social nature of learning. And so when you think about the discussion piece, once again, taking two different forms. So I'm going to start with the written piece. The written discussion and question feature, there's a chat feature in Google Meet. And so for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with the platform, up in that top right-hand corner, there's a little icon that looks like a speech bubble with a couple lines. And when you click on it, it then opens up a sidebar where you are able to then, down along the green line that's along the bottom, to type in a response, and then you click the lovely little paper airplane icon to then send your response to everyone in that Google Meet. So as a teacher, you can use that to your advantage to ask questions and have your students respond back, but also to help them with a back channel to be able to ask questions as you're presenting, much like we're doing right now. Now, the one thing I will tell you, as it currently sits, Google Meet, when you use the chat feature, it goes to every single participant. So that's maybe an advantage where the chat feature in Zoom might have a slight advantage right now, in my opinion, because once again, you have an option for written discussion and questions within Zoom using the chat feature along the bottom. But Gina mentioned some settings that you can go in your Zoom account online. There is an option within your chat settings for Zoom to allow for private chats. So what that would allow students to do is, instead of sending things to everyone in the meeting, they can select specific participants to send a response to, ask questions to. And so I know sometimes teachers get a little anxious about things like this because they're afraid that there's going to be communication between students behind, the scenes. It's probably already happening if they have their phone. So I would really advocate for you to go ahead and turn the setting on, because what it will allow you to do is to have private conversations with your students. Perhaps you want them to respond, but you have a student who's not comfortable putting out their answer to everyone in the group. This allows them to still be an active participant, but sharing their response maybe perhaps just with you. Same thing with the questions. Sometimes in an online learning community, when you're slowly but surely building those relationships, there might be students who are not feeling comfortable asking for help. And so if they can send you a private message asking you to go back over something, it removes a barrier where perhaps voices would have been silenced. I know I did a training session with some associates, and we talked about how important this feature might be to allow them to have one-on-one conversations with their students and support them during that synchronous connection in Zoom. Now, another, with either Google Meet or with Zoom, just another option instead of just everybody, kind of typing in the response, just a fun idea to try out at some point in time is a chat waterfall. So in essence, you pose a question and you have everybody type in their response, and then you have them wait. They don't hit return right away. You have them wait until you ask them to go, or you say a certain word, and then the responses filter in. So it's just another alternative besides the one-off kind of responses. So just throwing that out there as an extra kind of fun option.
And when I've done that, Lynn, one of the nice things that when we've done that, everybody's gotten some time to process and feel like they can contribute too. When you do that waterfall, it's kind of fun. Everybody types. Then when you say waterfall, everybody hits enter, and you just see all the great ideas come. And it's kind of fun, and it breaks it up. And we've done that with adults, and they've been as equally engaged as students.
Right, and I think that's so important what you just said about the processing time. It's a strategy that allows for the communication of ideas, but you pause for just a second, and then I would highly encourage you to, as an instructor, go back and have students go back and read what others have responded. So just don't forget that part, because that's super valuable. Now, when we also talk about thinking about age appropriateness and things like that, there's a reality that for some, maybe the idea of a written response is maybe not the best approach. And so we know that there's learner variability, and so wanting to give other options. So when we talk about this discussion, having those verbal discussions is super important. Now, once again, we talked about some ideas of, allowing students to do a mic check or a video check. But now, when we're talking about providing those opportunities for students to actually have an exchange of ideas, one option in Zoom is to use a breakout room. Now, once again, this is something that will be coming in October for Google Meet. It is not readily available. There are lots of different extensions that do some of these features right now for Google Meet. In the meantime, we decided to share just one because it came from a trusted source, and we know that there's lots of districts who are concerned about extensions. And so I would encourage you to sit down with your IT or your tech coach, if you have one, and kind of look through some of those. But we did want to highlight that there is an extension that you could do this in the meantime. But for those of you who are not familiar with breakout rooms, it is something that you do have to turn on in your Zoom account. And many of us have participated in breakout rooms, but we've never been the facilitator. So I wanted to take just a quick second to show you. Once you activate that, as you're facilitating or leading that Zoom call, you will have this option down in the corner for breakout rooms. And so when you click on it, you activate the number of rooms you want. You can assign students automatically or manually. And then there's another window where you can do some customization of sending the announcements and how often you want to bring people back, if you want to do different rooms. Those are all features that you can customize within that window, and then you assign your students to their breakout rooms, and you as the facilitator can go into each individual one and listen in. Now, that being said, why would you do a breakout room? Well, because sometimes, once again, those voices that might be silenced in a whole group setting, there's an opportunity to allow everyone's voice to be heard in a smaller setting. It's also about that comfort level. It's also about building relationships. And so those breakout rooms can be a really, really great place to truly get into that deeper exchange of ideas. Now, a couple things, once again, caveats, things to think about: age appropriateness. I maybe wouldn't send a group of kindergartners into a breakout room on their own. You know, so leveraging those people that you have maybe to support. And then also thinking about, you know, what are those things that you're asking them to engage in? Remember earlier we talked about roles, and so helping them get those conversations started. So using those breakout rooms to promote discussion, but scaffolding them for success and not just launching students into those conversations. Now, we also talked about how important gathering feedback really can be. To check on our students. I mean, that's what we do in a face-to-face classroom. We're constantly reading the room, and we're constantly checking in and using those visual cues and trying to understand where our students are with the process, what they're understanding and what they're not. So I want to share with you a couple options for some quick checks and a little bit more formal checks. And we'll talk about what I mean by that in just a second. So one quick check option within Zoom is to use the reactions. And so you'll notice down here in the bottom, there's a lovely little face that says reactions. Sometimes if you're not seeing it there, you have to click on the 3 dots with more. The reactions, basically there's 2 options. There's the hand clapping and there's a thumbs up. When you ask students to use reactions, what it will do is it will put whichever icon you've asked them to use onto their video for 10 seconds. So if you are in grid view, it's a real great visual check to make sure that students are understanding what it is that you're asking them to understand. Now, you don't always have to use the icons in the way, you know, the thumbs up kind of thing, you know, like, okay. You can also establish other uses. For example, if your answer was red, give me a thumbs up. You know, I mean, just leveraging those and asking students to use them, but it's a real quick reaction that you can visually check for understanding. Another option, now this is something that you have to turn on in your Zoom settings, is the option for nonverbal feedback. So under the participants down at the bottom, if you have this established and set up in your account, when you click on participants and your participants click on participants, a sidebar will open up similar to the chat window, but you'll notice across the bottom, you've got a couple different options where students can raise their hand. And then you've got other options like yes, no, go slower, go faster, thumbs up, thumbs down once again. Now the difference with these is that they will actually show up in that participant list and they stay there until you ask them to turn them off. But it's a great way to gather feedback and to do quick checks for understanding with your students. As a side note too, oftentimes leveraging these to for communication pieces, for example, the clock icon, if you have to step away, knowing that your student had to step away for whatever reason. But that's a real quick way to ensure that students are tracking, but also with the go faster, go slower gives you some important information as you are guiding the instruction. Oh, I'm so sorry. So unfortunately, those reaction and those participant icons are not something that are currently available in Google Meet, but they are supposed to be coming. So in the meantime, looking at some extensions might be an option, but also kicking it old school, going some analog. You know, before we were talking about those hand signals. So Gina mentioned the math talks. We also have, you know, things where we have teachers who are using colored cards, you know, red for no, green for yes, or just even the simple thumbs up, thumbs down, you know, just that visual check. So those are all real quick ways to help you read your classroom. But sometimes you want things that are a little bit more formal and you can hold on to some data. And so one of the options in Zoom, this once again is a feature that is going to be coming in Google Meet soon, is an option for polls. Once again, it's a setting that you have to turn on in your online account. But polls allow you to ask questions for your students. You can either establish them previous to the connection, or you can do them on the fly. When you look at this, you enter in whatever your question is, and there's two options. There's single choice and multiple choice. Just for clarification, single choice means that they can answer just with one selection. Multiple choice means they can do multiple selections. But when you activate a poll, you then get instant data. It doesn't tell you who's responded what, but it allows you to make some instructional decisions based on the questions that you're asking. And you can share these with your students so they can get some instantaneous feedback of where they are in the process. But once again, you know, in the meantime, that's not something that's available in Google Meet. So you also have third-party options, things like PollEverywhere or Mentimeter, which are both excellent options that allow for you to create those polls that can be in text format, they can be in graph format. There's a variety of different options that you can use. Or if you don't want to create an account, you've always got Google Forms. So definitely sharing with those. Now, I know that was, once again, a lot of information to share and a lot of resources to throw at you, but we're curious about what resources or what strategies you used for engagement that were super effective last spring, and what might be ones that you're excited to try out with your incoming students. So I'm going to pause for just a second to hear your ideas, but also feel free to ask some questions if you've got them. They're on brain overload?
Yeah, I think, but you know what? I think a lot of these things are things that we would do. You know, I'm thinking about my time in the classroom. I had a lot of these strategies, and I had small groups of kids, and I assigned roles as we did small group activities. So this is just taking it into a digital format to engage kids, and just knowing it makes me feel a little easier that I can do that in this environment. It's not just me sitting talking at my kids.
It's making the most of your synchronous learning environment.
Yeah. So Elise just made a comment in the chat that it was all so new last spring. Yeah, and it was like, boom, right there for you. So she didn't use these much, but now that we've got some time, and one of the things, if you are coming into that hybrid model of learning and you do have kids with you face-to-face at some point, it is good to practice it with them while they're in the room with you. So that way, when you do have to, when you have the opportunity to do it when they're at home or on a different site, they're familiar with those tools already. So it's okay to get them practicing. And like Lynn said, those headphones are going to be winners.
Well, and too, you know, remembering that just as it is when you're in that face-to-face environment, taking the time to work your way through this process of not going too fast, you know, making sure that they feel comfortable with the navigation of the platform and they're allowed that opportunity to build community before you move on to delivering content and things like that. It's okay to take it slow and not jump all in right from the very get-go.
All right.
So one thing we did want to mention is, obviously, once again, this was a lot in an hour, but we encourage you to definitely explore more of the synchronous online learning resources that we have on the Continuous Learning Field Guide site that the digital learning team put together. So if you haven't already explored that, we strongly recommend that you do.
Lynn and Gina, I'm putting a link to the Continuous Learning Field Guide, which is just a resource our team put together this summer for some learning that covers a lot of this stuff. That's in the chat, and it's on the Facebook in the comments. One of the things, the next webinar we are having is on Thursday morning, Digify Your Assessment and Feedback Toolbox. Again, all the recordings and the resource links will be at this bit.ly AEA webinar series. It is case sensitive. It's linked on the AEA system Facebook page. All of these webinars are posted there too. So if there are any final questions, let us know. If you do have questions as you get started with this year, reach out to your local AEA. All the AEAs have digital learning or technology consultants that can help support you moving forward and answer your questions. So have a wonderful year, and you're very welcome. Thanks, Gina. Thanks, Lynn.